So in the last video, we were learning about how to write formulas if we could figure out the charges of the ions. And in this video, I want to do it in reverse. How would you figure out the charge of an ion if you knew the formula? So first off, why would you want to do this? Well, the reason why is because often you have these transition metals where the charge isn't always the same thing. I mentioned that iron can have a 2 positive or a 3 positive charge commonly. How do you know the difference? Well, you have to look at the formula itself. So if we look at those two formulas for iron, one is going to look like this. And the other is going to look like this. Of their compounds with oxygen, that is. When iron combines with oxygen, one way is this way and another is this way. So which irons are we looking at here? What's the charge of these two irons? Well, we need to deconstruct these, remembering that they each had to add up to 0, right? So whatever combination here had to add up to a charge of 0, neutral, ionic compound, whatever charges here had to add up to 0, a neutral ionic compound. So if we break this down, here we have 2 irons and 3 oxygens. And here we have 1 iron and 1 oxygen. In each case, we do know the charge of the oxygen because oxygen is always a -2 charge in ionic compounds when it does these ionic bonds. So that's going to be a 2 negative, 2 negative, 2 negative, 2 negative. So over here, this is the easiest one to figure out first. If you have iron combining with a 2 negative oxygen, one of each, and it adds up to 0, what must that one's charge be? Well, what plus 2 negative equals 0? It's like the simplest algebra problem you start with when you're in 3rd or 4th grade or whatever grade, I don't know. What does this need to be if you add -2 to it and you get 0? Well, that has to be a +2. +2 plus -2 equals 0. So we can go back up then and write in, this one must be a 2 positive iron to combine with a -2 to make 0. Over here, you can see that it's a different one. 2 irons combine with 3 oxygens to get to 0. So that's a little bit harder of a problem, but you can add it all up the same way. 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6, so there's 6 negatives here. What plus 6 negatives equals 0? Well, that's 6 positives. Have to do that. But those 6 positives are spread out over 2 irons, so each of them is half. So each of them is a 3 positive. So 3 plus 3 is 6 positive. 6 positive plus 6 negatives equals 0. So again, we add up all the negative charges, figure out their total. The two totals have to be equal so that it adds up to 0. And then that charge, you figure out, is it on just one or both ions? Both ions have to be the same charge. So this is the iron with a 3 positive charge. That compound has the iron with a 2 positive charge. And that's how you do it. If you're trying to figure out the charge of a transition metal, you can use the chemical formula to actually backtrack and figure out the charge on the transition metal, given the formula and the charge of the anion. Here's a slight preview, is that next week we're going to start learning how to name these. And we're going to name this thing the word iron, except because it has that variable charge, we're going to add its charge in parentheses after it in Roman numerals. So if it has a variable charge, we're going to call this one iron 3 to denote that it has a 3 plus charge. And we're going to call this one iron 2 to denote that it was the iron with the 2 plus charge. But that's a preview for next week. For right now, let's do this activity where we figure out the charges on transition metal cations.